Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 20th annual Top 10 Tech Trends Debate. Forbes is here for the 7th year, and we are so excited to welcome them back. Thank you, and congratulations on your own 17th annual Midas list. Churchill Club is about looking forward and thoughtfully exploring opportunities for innovation, economic growth, and social good. Now, with 2 decades of trend predictions behind us, we thought it was also a great time to take a look back. So we've pulled a selection of predictions for you from the first 5 years of the program, both hits and misses, but I'll let you decide which is which. It's 1998. For a little context, Google is established and hired its first employee. Predictions that year: the conventional software model will end and be replaced by software that is stored and accessed elsewhere. Use of mobile platforms, handheld computers, and cell phones will explode. Not the cell phones, but the use. As will new applications for them. Tech and Washington will embrace. E-commerce will finally hit Main Street. The next year, millennium celebrations and Y2K worries are on people's minds. Predictions: online retail will get personalized. Online retailers will get physical. And tech will remain a fringe issue for politicians. In 2000, AOL buys Time Warner for $165 billion, reflecting the growing dominance of the internet. Predictions: distributed computing will redefine computer networks. Bluetooth will create significant startup opportunities. A venture capital shakeout will force the return to investment basics. The year of 9/11. Predictions: there will be a host of new military security technologies to fight terrorism and other physical threats. Nanotechnology will win over mainstream VCs. And the biggest market for streaming media will not be digital entertainment, it will be corporate training. Finally, the year 2002, Enron is bankrupt. Virtualization will be all the rage for CIOs worldwide. The hype around nanotechnology will spawn backlash, as well as a new discipline called nanoethics. Cable companies will control how consumers access the internet, watch TV, and even use their phones, beating the baby bells at their own game. This is the first 5 years of this program. Whether or not our predictions come to pass, we really believe it's important to continue imagining the future and exchanging thoughts and ideas, so this program is just wonderful for that. Our platinum sponsor is Accenture, and we cannot thank them enough for their support. Special thanks to Julie Rosendahl and John Walsh. Thank you. Our silver sponsors are Luxembourg Trade and Investment and Checkpoint Software. Thank you very much. And finally, thanks to Chris Stedman of Silicon Valley Bank for amazing help in pulling together our panel. And now I have something really important to tell you, and I would like to ask you to listen. We know that we've been seeing innovation in our lives for hundreds of years, and venture capitalists help stoke that innovation for those hundreds of years. And over time, we've seen attitudes and processes and leadership styles undergo shifts. There's a trend happening, a shift that's happening in this area and in innovation in general that people are not talking about enough. And we noticed when the trends came in tonight from our pundits that nobody brought this trend up. And so we want to share with you, you may have heard of it, it's called CI. Anybody heard of it? Counterintuition. That's right. So let's take a look at a clip to learn more.
Your 2015 TED Talk, by any terrestrial standards, was a star-studded event. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Janet Yellen, Yeezy, Elizabeth Warren, Wayne Gretzky, Lena Dunham, Malala Yousafzai, Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump.
TED.
Technology.
Entertainment.
Design.
Diagrams.
What is CI? Well, we all know what intuition is. It's the sense we get that we know what should or will happen next. When we come across an intuitive solution, our natural reaction is, hey, I get it. That makes sense. This is now completely irrelevant. When we see an innovative solution today, our natural response should be, how can that possibly be true? This makes no sense.
It just blows away this notion that somehow you need 10,000 hours of experience to develop expert intuition. Well, it turns out counterintuition only takes 10 minutes. Everybody's got 10 minutes.
Get to know an expert in your chosen field and ignore everything he has to say. You pay your customers to be your customers. You've heard of products that sell themselves? Well, that's the old paradigm. This product buys itself from the consumer. If you cannot find a problem, create a problem. You would be surprised how the very act of counterintuitively solving a phantom problem can create real-world problems that require counterintuitive solutions.
Silicon Valley's been living for 8 years in this bubble, so focused on data and metrics and accuracy, and lost touch with what it is that consumers want, right? And you know, Trump's victory really showed us that there's a new perspective on how people are thinking, or how they reject thinking. You know, we have to start not thinking like they are if we're ever going to build the solutions that they're not thinking they want. Michael's visionary understanding of the counterintuition that elected President Trump, that illuminates a new path of investment for us. Our mission and our duty is to find and fund the big opportunities that a fear and anger-based economy will present.
I think all we can do is try and understand what Michael's doing.
He's not doing due diligence. He's not talking to the entrepreneur.
Venture is no longer about money. It's no longer about what we're investing in. We need to be asking the question, what does venture even mean anymore?
53% of American citizens over 55 would prefer less information over more. And 24% are willing to pay for less information.
American jobs that have been shipped overseas aren't coming back. But what if we could send Americans to those jobs?
For a small fee, the market reunites American workers with their outsourced job in the country where their job was outsourced.
We're good. One of the interesting models that Dave and I have been playing with is what we call inverse value creation, where you start in the very first round of financing at $1 billion valuation, and then future financings, you buy more and more of the company for less and less money, depending on how successful they wish they were not at that particular time.
It's a complex financial strategy around price averaging. It's something you learn in business school.
Now, if you go to a hotel, you get your own individual soaps, your own individual toothpaste, your own individual Bible, and most important of all, your own individual Q-tips in a little cellophane wrapper. That is what Domotor does to a human being.
So we take the fat from my patients, we extract the triglycerides from the fat, and turn it into fuel. I power my SUV with fat from triglycerides that are extracted from my patients.
Wait, so you're using liposuction of human fat cells to create a biofuel?
To power your SUV.
That's correct. That's correct.
Wow. And to give electricity to sub-Saharan Africa.
That's correct. That's the innovation.
That's the goal. And that's the promise of Feel Good, which is the first energy company created by humans, for humans, from humans.
So you can see that's going to really be important. Oh, excuse me for a moment. Yes, Marcia. Who? Michael. Oh my God. Michael Furtick is here. Michael, come up. Oh my God. Oh, I'm very surprised. Oh, Michael, welcome. What an honor.
Thank you. This wasn't planned. The slide was spontaneous.
I'm a fan. Michael Furtick.
Thank you very much.
You invented counterintuition.
I did, yeah.
You've had a chance to apply it now for several years. What has this meant to you?
First of all, I want to say thank you to the Churchill Club, and also to Martin Sweeney, who's the filmmaker of Bubble Proof over here, and to David Cowan. Is David here right now? David's right here, one of the brilliant creators.
Didn't he tell you you're taking his place up here?
What has counterintuition meant to me? So the way Michael would answer, by the way, Heroic Ventures is a real thing, and we don't invest in those things. But the way Michael would answer in character would be, the better question, Karen, would be, what has counterintuition not meant to me? And that is nothing, which is to say everything. And I am just grateful for all of my inspiration from myself for being so inspiring.
Michael, what advice would you like to give the innovators in the audience that they would never, ever, ever, ever hear from anybody else?
Well, I would say, first of all, Silicon Valley is very good at, in character, I'd say Silicon Valley is good at aphorisms, sayings, per vote, you know, the things that we say that are obviously hilariously false. So they're almost true. So, you know, crawl before you walk and walk before you run. And so I would say, counterintuitively, you want to fly before you succeed. And you want to leap before you're born, would be another one. And the other one would be focus on everything at all time. And it's not that there is no plan B. There is no plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael Furtick of Heroic Ventures. Sometimes, folks, we just have to bow to mystery. Now I invite Robin Murdoch to the stage. Robin is Global Managing Director, Software and Platforms Industry at Accenture. He is a serious trend watcher himself and predictor, and frequent Churchill Club moderator. Welcome, Robin. Hi, Robin.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening. I'm delighted, on behalf of Accenture, to congratulate the Churchill Club on the 20th annual edition of this great event. So congratulations, Karen and the Churchill Club. Our two organizations have collaborated for over a decade to provide opportunities just like this one for motivated, talented, creative people to come together and explore new opportunities for innovation, economic growth, and social good. Karen brought up interesting examples of trends predicted during the first 5 years of this event. Since we asked the pundits on stage to share trends with potential for explosive growth in 3 to 5 years, I was curious to see how trends that were predicted 5 years ago in 2013 actually played out. So cheekily, I chose 3, one hit, one spectacular miss, and then one that's showing great potential. So the top prediction that was definitely a hit was that wearable computing is the watch, not the glass. And so wearables are all about the watch now. And with the success of Apple Watch and its focus on health and fitness, that was pretty much on the money. But what missed the mark? This one was uncanny. So I'm going to read it out to you, and you can read along just how ghastly this is. So cyber warfare becomes a good thing. Advantage technologically, America starts dismantling conventional military forces, replacing them with cyber capabilities, completely disrupting the defense industry. Where to start with that one? And then finally, a really positive one, which was around personalized medicine. And it's a prediction that's really started to play out and will continue to have a massive impact on all of our lives. Technologies that have developed in the past 5 years, like CRISPR, gene editing, could radically improve global health. So sometimes we're on the money, and sometimes we're completely wrong. So we're all very interested to hear what our 2018 pundits have to say. So let's welcome and call them up now. So partner at Bessemer and co-writer and co-star of Bubble Proof, as we just saw, returning to the top 10 stage, David Cowan. Former Goldman Sachs analyst and first female general partner at Greylock, Sarah Guo. Partner at Lightspeed and consumer tech investor Nicole Quinn. Partner at Redpoint and data-driven blogger Tunguz. Former VP of Product and Engineering at Facebook and partner at Sequoia, Vernal. Welcome and thank you for all being here. And next we turn to our MCs. Media veteran and Forbes CEO, Mike Federley. My apologies. And then prolific author, speaker, and co-founder of the Churchill Club, Forbes publisher, Rich Carlgard. On with the show.
That works as well. You can take that. Perfect. On with the show. So I am told that this event is a terrific event every year, but I've never been here. So I've been thrown into the deep end of the pool as an MC, and I am anticipating another great event. So I hope you're all with me on this. And Robin, thanks for that introduction. The Churchill Club for the opportunity here. It's been 7 years that Forbes has supported this event. We love that. Wasn't looking for a clap, but I'll take it. That was perfect. Now, it's excellent also to be here with my buddy Rich Carlgard, who has been here, I think, at most of these events, and all of the very fine and smart VCs, of which are also, I think, newbies to this event as far as being on the stage, except for David right here, who's been here a second time. So I suspect there are many Warriors fans in the room here. Thanks for spending the evening with us instead of watching the game. I'm sure that took a lot of discipline, and we will say go Dubs. We've been asked not to update anyone on the score, as we want to keep the surprise. So we will not be doing that through the night, if any of you are looking for that.
Well, thanks, Mike. Karen just handed me a note. If you're struggling to get on the Marriott Wi-Fi system, you're probably better off at this point to just use your phone cell service. Maybe the Wi-Fi will come up. Maybe the Warriors will win, too. But, I shouldn't have said that. It's great to be back on the Churchill Club stage. When I co-founded this organization, I never imagined I'd be standing here 33 years later. Of course, Tony Perkins and I were only 13 when we started the club. Yeah. But just a few words, a little background on our panelists today. Sarah, let's congratulate Sarah and give Sarah a big hand for becoming the first female partner at Greylock in its 53-year history. I mean, a pace of 2 per century is pretty good for Greylock, I would have to say. Big milestone. Your spouse, Pat Grady, is in the audience. Pat was the reigning champion of this event in 2016. That's a little pressure for you, Sarah, perhaps. Of course, I kind of wonder about Pat. Pat, stand up, our 2016 champ. But here's Pat's big conundrum. His spouse, Sarah, is one of the panelists today, but one of his Sequoia's partners, Mike Vernal, is on the stage too. So who are you going to cheer for?
I
love them both equally, but I love Sarah more.
Does Sarah have a response on that or not?
He's a very smart man.
Very smart man. Very good.
That's why he won. Yeah.
Great. Now, Mike, you spent 8 years as VP Product and Engineering at Facebook. In the past 2 years at Sequoia, you've been advocating higher levels of thematic investing. What's behind that push for you?
I'm not actually sure I would say I advocate higher levels of thematic investing. I kind of run the gamut in a way that is probably concerning to Pat and my fellow partners. I'm basically interested in any incredibly smart entrepreneur in a underserved market, and I think the commonality across great businesses is much greater than the differences across sectors. So I kind of run the gamut from medical devices to messaging apps to self-driving cars. So.
Very good. And David, I see from the bubble-proof clip we saw that you're already working on your next gig, which is as a writer and actor, I take it. Then you also sing in an a cappella group, I understand. So how's all this entertainment going?
Well, I'm sticking to my day job.
Sticking
That's
to
what
your
you're asking. It's actually particularly fun to do performance art kinds of things when you don't need to rely on them for your livelihood. It makes it more fun.
Makes it a lot more fun. Nicole, you're working to further Lightspeed's focus on consumer technology, and you're also getting married this summer. Congratulations. And what are you most looking forward to?
Oh, a good competition, a good debate. Keeping the competition high here.
Very good.
Most looking forward to on this panel, you mean, or in life? Or?
That was a life question before we get to the panel, I think. And Rich, I think...
Yeah. Tom, congrats are in order for you, too. This year is your 10th anniversary at Redpoint. You co-authored a book called Winning with Data and are one of the best read bloggers in venture capital, writing about data-driven change. Do you have another book in the works?
No, not for the foreseeable future. Writing a book is like writing 4 term papers back to back. I wrote that book in about 90 days, and I don't recommend the experience.
That's good. Now, going back to Karen's comment about Google, which I guess could be summed up that was a pretty successful one, one of the more spectacular startups. And 20 years later, though, here we are under scrutiny for potential antitrust violations and more. No one said any of this would be easy. So last year, the trend voted by the audiences as most likely to succeed was tiny brains in everything, about coupling local intelligence to sensors and turning the Internet of Things into the sensory cortex of the planet. So let's get started and hear what comes out on top this year. It's up to you in the audience to vote. Vote frequently, it seems like, and try your machines a few times, and hopefully we'll get an accurate count. But we do encourage you to make sure you vote so that we do get an accurate top trend of the year. Now, each speaker is prepared to deliver 2 trends based on the following criteria. Number 1, they are not obvious, or they're not obvious today, or they have been very underestimated. And 2, we may see explosive impact in these areas in about 3 to 5 years. So here's how it'll play out. Rich and I will give a brief description of the trends, one by one. Then the owner of the trend gets 2.5 minutes to persuade everyone in the room that his or her trend is the top trend. The panel then will vote and comment. The panel up here will vote and comment with their paddles. Speakers get 1 minute for rebuttal after the vote on the panel. And I think in the past, the panel is either red for disagree, green for agree. No sideways panels this year. We're being strict, all right? You got to show one way or the other. And speakers get 1 minute then for the rebuttal based on the feedback from the panelists. Then 1 minute for, okay, then the audience will vote, and we'll see where we end up. The pundits, one of you will win a magical wizard wand at the end of the evening. I'm told this is really an incredible gift. So good luck.
All right, let's dive in. Trend number 1, the new space stack will enable extraterrestrial commerce. The space industry is being turned upside down by a new ecosystem of startups developing microsat constellations that replace mainframe-like systems at 1% of the cost with planetary coverage and higher resilience. Companies in tourism, mining, communications, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, defense, media, and more will buy the tech and services they need off the shelf. They'll buy it off the shelf to operate extraterrestrial fleets. David, take it away.
So for 50 years, the space industry was super stagnant because it's really hard to do things in space, to get to outer space, and so you need big rockets and big government projects. And so this is one industry that defied Moore's law for 50 years. And then when the internet came along, all the big satellites in geo, they could no longer compete, and the whole industry collapsed. And some students at Cal Poly and Stanford, out of desperation, said,
we want to do some experiments. Let's use these cheap cell phone components to create little satellites that we put in low Earth orbit. And that seemed like a crazy idea because they're not space components, but if they're in low Earth orbit, it doesn't matter. It's just there for a short period of time. And lo and behold, that became the basis for a new business model, which is to create constellations of nanosatellites which can operate in low Earth orbit, and you can replenish them with new and better semiconductors. And this has now completely disrupted the space industry. It no longer makes sense to do a $1 billion satellite in GEO. Now people are building constellations of very, very small, cheap satellites that they can replenish. And startups are now able to participate because it's so cheap and easy to enter. A new ecosystem is now arising with hundreds of new startups that are doing all the components. And companies who are not space companies like Monsanto, or mining companies, or tourist companies, or manufacturing and pharma, can now actually participate and expand into space to be more competitive. Which means if your business is today a global business, that maybe isn't enough. You have to think bigger. There's nothing more important in the arc of human history than ultimately becoming a multiplanetary species. And the development of this ecosystem is like the spawning of the internet. This is what's going to allow us to colonize space, first cis space, and then the moon, asteroids, Mars, and beyond.
So now we ask the panelists to...
Yeah, now what we
and
do
extra
is
credit
all the
for I did that in
panelists
a minute and a half.
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
The panelists will hold up their paddles. Do you agree with David that that's sort of in the 3 to 5 year time frame, or that will begin to take off? If you agree, show us a green, hold your paddles high, and if you disagree, show us a red. Okay. Hold them up. Hold them up high.
Good.
Okay.
That's
now,
a good sign. It's good to be contrarian.
I'll start with Sarah, and we'll move down this way. Each of you take a minute to defend your vote.
So I completely agree with you on the cost curve and the ecosystems, but I don't understand why we all need to go to space, right? I think that it will drive connectivity. You can do imaging. Maybe there's mining out there. For your average Fortune 500 company, there's a lot of work to do on the ground here.
Okay.
Not yet.
No. We'll go
Okay.
through. Each of the panelists will have a minute to defend their vote, and then you get 1 minute to have the last word. So, Nicole.
So I actually agreed, and we've spent a lot of time internally debating space overall. We recently invested in a company called Vector, which is a launch platform for small satellites. And the reason being is that we think space is just getting started. We think there are huge opportunities. We think the time is now. But do I think that it's going to be as near term as perhaps this says? No, I think it will be a little bit later. I think it is going to be slower than we perhaps hoped for.
Tom?
Yeah, I said no. I do believe space is a really important frontier for our species. I think interplanetary travel and all those things, particularly the acquisition of resources in space, is potentially very profitable, and maybe even a multi-trillion-dollar industry. My issue with it is I don't think that happens in 3 to 5 years.
And Mike?
I voted no, but I love space. We actually also co-invested in Vector, and so I'm very excited about what Vector is doing. I think my concern is I think there's a handful of applications in space. I think there's imaging. I think there's various forms of imaging, whether it's sort of visual range imaging or it's sort of infrared or the like. And I think there's telecommunications, but I think that will tend towards a small number of companies in space selling the imagery and the sort of the network, and then everyone else leveraging it, as opposed to a platform that sort of proliferates a whole new set of companies and applications.
Got it.
Okay. David, before the audience votes, you have a minute to
Great.
have the last word.
So I think we're all still stuck in thinking of space in terms of the things that we've done in the past. And we think about sending people to the moon. We think about imaging. This is like when people said back in 1990 that this ARPANET thing was good for email and FTP, and that's about it. And nobody imagined all the applications that would come. I agree that we don't all need to go to space. This is about building an ecosystem where we can colonize space through our machines, through our sensors, through our communications devices, and then build from there. The idea of let's build a big rocket and go to Mars, it's very exciting. That's not something, though, that moves our economy in a productive way out to take advantage of all the resources that are out there and the access to the planet that we get. When we can see the weather, when we can move bits better, when we have better situational awareness of the Earth, and we have resources from space, it's going to, and we can see our own crops, and we can see what's happening here on Earth in a way that we can't see from the surface. It's going to impact many, many, many industries. I see them every day, entrepreneurs coming in, pitching entirely new, amazing new ideas that I never would have imagined. And so I think we're just getting started to see what this ecosystem can do.
Okay, audience, you've heard all the arguments. Vote yay or nay. If you agree with David, vote that way. If you don't, vote that way. And some of you have already voted, and as soon as you voted, we'll tally them up. What do we have, a minute for the votes?
I have one more for those who haven't voted yet. There are 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there were 400 satellites in low Earth orbit. There had been historically about 10 to 15 every year. In the last few years, that number jumped to the hundreds. That number has doubled in the last 3 years, and it will be growing by the thousands by 2020. So that's how fast for those who think it's not happening and that it won't happen in 3 to 5 years, those are actual facts, not on the ground, but in space.
It was creeping up as you were talking. Yeah. you were getting the agrees going there. So.
Nice.
Okay.
Probably should have mentioned that.
Got a few more seconds to wrap up the vote.
Through your second comment.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was a lesson, I think. Keep working it on these panels up here.
At least the voting is working.
David, when's the over-under on the first accident, the first collision with all those satellites?
Oh, there are already a lot of collisions of satellites. That's nothing new. There was an Iridium satellite that collided with a Russian satellite a couple of years ago. There have been many satellites that have just exploded and created debris, which then creates other debris. That's sort of a hazard of space that is increasing.
Okay, we wound up with very round numbers on this one. 40 agreed and 60 didn't agree. Mike, you want to take us to number 2?
We'll go to trend number 2. Move fast and change everything. From self-driving trucks to electric scooters, every segment of the multi-trillion-dollar transportation industry is being reinvented and or reinvented. And the unexpected impact on our infrastructure and our lives will be massive. Sarah, over to you.
We are entering a new age of mobility. Key technologies are intersecting today to drive a wholesale rethinking of how people and goods move from point to point. The smartphone put a remote for the real world in everyone's hand, allowing us to order goods, services, rides on demand. And then that smartphone supply chain, with its ever better, cheaper cameras, batteries, etc., is being leveraged by the makers of new transport devices. At the same time, AI and deep learning are making advances, and access to computing is cheaper and easier than ever. With these components in place, we can picture a self-driving future. But I would posit that we don't have to wait for that the first wave of this change in mobility is already at our shores. Ride-sharing is so ubiquitous that it's decreasing the demand for personal car ownership, once a core household expense. Trucking, which is the lifeblood of the retail and the manufacturing supply chains, has always been mediated by humans and call centers brokering supply and demand on the phone. But today, those humans are being replaced by apps and algorithms. The second-order effects of these changes in mobility will also be massive. If you think about where you choose to live and what drives real estate prices, commutes are a huge one. And so if our commutes are improved, what will your house be worth in 3 or 5 or 10 years? I think that we're at a huge moment right now. If the last decade was about mobile apps, much of the next decade will be about real-world mobility. Founders and innovators are going to find this fertile ground to build companies and change industries in, and we should all buckle in for the ride.
All right, panelists, who goes along for that ride? Hold your paddles up high, please. No, no, yes, no? No, I'm sorry. No, no, yes, yes. We'll start down the other side. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think there is a ton of innovation that's happening. I think transportation is on the order of 12% of GDP and is going to be completely upended by self-driving in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the biggest question I have is, from a business perspective, kind of who makes any money? Like, the perfect competition in the transportation space so far has kind of ground out all meaningful profit margins. And so I think everything is going to get disrupted, and it'll be interesting to see who emerges with a great business model.
I agreed with this. I read this book that was called 23 Things You Don't Know About Capitalism. And it was a professor from Cambridge who argued that the invention that transformed the world the most in the past 100 years was the washing machine. And it's the washing machine because it suddenly enabled half of the workforce to start to work, women. And I believe that things like self-driving cars and self-driving trucks are really going to empower large swaths of the American and actually the global population to start doing other things. I mean, if you look at the average age of a semi-truck driver, it's about 55. And one of the biggest challenges in that industry is actually recruiting new drivers. And all of a sudden, we're going to basically unleash a huge amount of productivity as a result. I'm a big believer.
Very good. Nicole?
So what I'm about to say might be considered blasphemy in Silicon Valley. But it's not all about the tech. So I agree with Sarah that the technology is in a very exciting place. However, do I think the regulation is going to hold it back? Do I think the consumer adoption is going to hold it back? Yes. Even if you ask Elon Musk, he will say it is going to take a lot longer for the regulation to actually get there, and that is going to slow the pace of change. And so if you look around in Silicon Valley, Sarah's point about electric scooters is a great one. There are electric scooters everywhere you go in San Francisco and LA. But if you look outside the rest of the country, it's going to take a lot longer. And so do I think this change is going to come in the near term? I'm not so sure.
I think the most interesting change is the shift to electric, which is, of course, incredibly important to our planet, but I'm not sure that it really affects us in our day-to-day lives. I've got electric cars, and I pretty much live my life as I did before with the electric cars. The invention of new devices is hard to get too excited about. We were promised that the Segway was going to actually change the whole world and cause people to move or whatever, or change how they work, and that didn't happen. And I think that with the general secular move into more urban living, I think what happens with cars becomes over time a little bit less important. And I think that the people who will be whose lives will be most massively impacted are the people who actually lose their jobs. There's about 10% of the workforce that's tied somehow to transportation today, driving. And I'm not sure that the 3.5 million truck drivers want to be unleashed, as it was put. I think they want to just be leashed in their employment the way they are.
No. Employment is good. Sarah, your rebuttal to any of those comments?
Yeah, I believe that self-driving will happen, but I'm not placing all my chips there. I think that the change in mobility spreads to trucking, a more scoped-down problem than just passenger vehicles. You're basically driving in a straight line down a highway with fewer edge cases to handle. So it's a simpler or more constrained problem. And then if I think about the ways goods and services move, I like to look at Uber as an example. I think if you win consumer expectations, your fight with the regulators is going to be a lot more fun, or at least a lot faster. And so an example would be Amazon has taught all of us to expect goods to arrive on our doorstep in 2 days. Instacart and other companies are teaching us to expect those goods to arrive in 2 hours. I think once the consumer expects that our transportation and logistic networks can support an incredibly different service level, then this is going to happen much sooner than we think.
All right, audience. Once again, we want everyone to vote here, so please put your vote up. And we'll start looking at the results on the screen.
I wish I had an extra smart thing to add, like David did at the end.
Well, you may not need it at this point, but
No, you
punch it up.
You said all your smart things up front. That was a better strategy.
All right, we've got.
Come on, who doesn't love those electric scooters?
30-second more if you haven't voted.
Now I'm just hurting myself.
Flying cars, everybody.
Your car's in space. You guys could get together, I think. That would work.
Joint deal.
All right, are the results all in? Very good. So we see 61% agreeing and 39% disagreeing. So Rich, now do we move on to trend number 3?
Yep. Trend number 3, voice first will open up internet to the world. We are trying to bring the world online. However, 25% of the adult population are illiterate, so the way to bring them online will be voice first. It's a big idea. Nicole, explain.
So what is the issue that Mark Zuckerberg has said is the greatest challenge to our generation? It is the fact that everybody deserves to be connected, yet it's going to be, quite frankly, bloody difficult to bring everyone online. There are 25% of the adult global population are illiterate. That's over 1 billion people. So trying to bring them online with this is going to be very tough. We also forget about the fact that all the children that are pre-literate, perhaps mobile isn't necessarily the way. Instead, let's think about an additional platform as well as mobile, which is voice. Now, voice is a platform that I think could solve those problems, could bring everybody on, online at the end of the day. We're already seeing voice as a successful platform for Alexa, when you're saying, hey, Alexa, give me my news briefing. So it gives you the news in the morning. It's already being used for music, the #1 use case for voice. But what about voice being used for commerce, for every single brand, where you can say to your favorite, you can say, Alexa, order me size 7 pair of Rothy's shoes. You can find the next gaming platform that is voice first, and will be able to use voice to bring the world online. So let's think about voice, in addition to mobile, as the next platform for the world.
Okay, fellow panelists, vote yay or nay with your paddles, and hold your paddles high, green or red. David, you got to hold your panel.
Yeah, they want it up high there.
Raise it up so people in the back of the room can see.
There you go.
Okay, we'll start with David and work down this way, and you've got a minute to agree or disagree.
Well, so I wish I could go sideways, because I completely agree that voice first is a very exciting vision. I'm not convinced that the link to literacy is the cause for it to be so important. I was so shocked when I saw the statistic that you did. I checked. I had to look it up, and actually, literacy rates are thankfully rising. Most of the people in that stat were in China and India, where the governments have implemented strong programs. And the number of illiterate people now has dropped, according to UNESCO, down to 775 million in the world. And so actually, literacy rates are actually moving in the right direction. Literacy is incredibly important to employment and empowerment and even peace. But I'm not sure that giving people, talking phones so that they don't have to read is necessarily the right direction to fix that.
Sarah, your thoughts?
I guess I'm with David. I think voice is incredibly interesting as an interaction mode, but I just think of it as a facet of mobile. And I guess the way I would picture it is if I wanted to focus on literacy, there are so many rich things that a mobile phone can do to drive literacy, and different, I don't know about you guys, but as a good millennial, the main way I interact with my phone is photos. So I guess I put myself in this bucket of being able to interact with different ways that are not just voice. that might be accessible to the 25 or 20% that you talked about.
Tom.
I'm a huge believer in voice. I dictated my book, actually, and I respond to all my emails with voice. Yeah. It turns out you can type 3 times faster by speaking than with a keyboard. I believe in ambient computing. I think the future of computation actually is a future where we spend more time with our computers but less time with screens. And we're getting to that point because deep learning and other advances in machine learning have actually Microsoft and Google have shown that computers can understand humans with the same level that humans can understand humans. And so I would expand this definition of illiteracy that Nicole talked about to be not just reading literacy, but computer literacy. The fraction of the population in the world that doesn't know how to operate a computer well is substantially higher than 25%. And the way that they're going to learn to interact with computers, whether they're small or they're in underdeveloped countries, is going to be through voice, because that's the way they interact with humans.
Mike.
So I also love voice. My son's first word was Dada, his second word was Alexa, his third word was Mama, much to the chagrin of my wife. So I love voice. That's it. The thing, I worry about 2 things here. One is I worry that just base connectivity is the first real mode to cross before voice. And then 2, I think voice can be a good low bandwidth input mode, or it's at least competitive with typing on the input side. I think it is not that efficient on the output side. And so I think the modality may be searching with voice, but I think to consume the information coming from your phone or from whatever device you're using, I think you're either just going to be watching videos or you're going to need to be able to read and sort of interact with the flow of information that's coming back. So.
All right, Nicole, you have a minute to convince any doubters before the audience votes.
So first of all, I'd say, yep, David is right. It's 775 million people, which is not a billion, but it is still a huge number that I think is important when we think about bringing everybody online. We need to bring everyone online. And I think you raise a really good point, Tomasz, which is like computer literacy is in itself something that we take for granted. But we've got to stop, thinking about right here, right now, and thinking about the rest of the world. And so it's much easier to say, okay, Google, order me X, rather than having to always do it online. Even my mother finds that much better. Now she has a little Alexa Dot. And Sarah's point about mobile is interesting because, yes, right now we definitely think about mobile, speaking to Siri, but I think increasingly so, you look at the adoption rates of Alexa in the home, and it's great, it's kind of like this Trojan horse into the home. And so now people have been gifting them to family, friends, they're in the home, and it's like, what next? How are they going to be used? We don't yet know how Amazon are going to use Alexa, but I wouldn't think of it just as mobile first. Voice first is its own category, and this Trojan into the home, Amazon's going to do great things with.
All right, let's we go to the vote, and we've got a minute to vote and tally them all up.
Come on.
A horse race.
Awesome. Split audience.
So close.
Nicole, say something. Push.
Alexa, bring me more votes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Alexa, tell us a joke.
Well, it looks like it's pretty hardened up, and you've got the majority, 56-44, Nicole. Excellent.
Very good. And now let's go on to trend number 4, the hunt for authenticity. Deep learning enables computers to synthesize voice indistinguishable from humans and then generate photos that look real. Plus, computers enable disinformation at greater scale than ever before. Think the election or the net neutrality debate. Determining authenticity will be an important growth area. Tom? Floor is all yours.
Sure. So we just came out of an election where we didn't know what the truth was. We just had an argument about net neutrality where 95% of the public comments were fabricated. We're in an epoch now where software can create a video of President Trump saying something he never said. We can create videos of people doing things they've never done, often illegal things. In fact, there's a new category of pornography called deep pornography, where you have actors who've never committed these acts in videos that are indistinguishable to humans. We can synthesize code using machines. We can create music. We can create new forms of art, all of which are created by computers. We can even fake human calls for all of you who saw Google's duplex. What is real? What is authentic? What is genuine? All those questions are increasingly difficult to discern. And so how do we, as citizens, operate in a world where we don't know what's true, what's real? Who can you trust? Are you speaking to a human or not? Is this piece of writing something that Mike wrote or a computer? Is this code by my software engineer something he wrote or something an algorithm wrote? Did my wife actually kiss that man? I think there's going to be a new class of software that guarantees authenticity. The first is there's going to be a class of the value of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal or other publications, the value of that brand and that trust is going to increase. The second is there's going to be software that actually authenticates the authenticity. That's something that I wrote or Mike created. There's going to be software that actually records ownership in the creation of new and novel assets. And all of this is going to create a new and really interesting software industry where trust is the basis. Thank you.
All right, panelists, put your paddles up high. I see green, green, red, green. So Mike, we'll start down there again, since Rich and I have established this pattern here.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point. I haven't thought about this in the context of venture or investing. I'm not sure I think it's an incredibly important problem to solve. I'm not sure it's going to be a great business. I need to think about that some more. I think the fundamental question that I wonder about is, not to wade into the Facebook debate since I was there for a long time, but I think one of the most complicated questions just in like political discourse in the US today is basically what are facts? Like when you can't agree on the basic facts, it's hard to have a conversation about this stuff. And so I think I wonder how much of this is a technological problem versus some broader societal discourse problem. But I think it's an incredibly important problem to solve. So I think it's very interesting.
So I do think it's an important problem to solve. The British consular, Andrew, who's in the room somewhere, did a great dinner recently where we brought together politicians, UK, US, to discuss this exact, one of the issues being exactly this. So it's certainly very important. But let's ask a question for a moment, which is that, can tech in its original form enable authenticity? Like for me, it enables people to tell their truth. It enables people to speak up. Yes, absolutely, it gets it very, very wrong sometimes. But I just feel like it actually gives a lens for authenticity because prior to this, if you think about the many, many layers that news had to go through, newspapers, the many different people that it had to go through until it got to you. And could the news have been shifted a little bit along that way? Perhaps. And so I think it gives you the opportunity to say firsthand what your truth is, what your feelings are. And so let's think about that as a question, just to play devil's advocate.
So Tom actually beat me to it because I submitted my trends late, and I was going to talk about this because I think it's really interesting. But I also think it's a social debate, not necessarily a software problem. And I think if you look at the publishing industry today, they are incented to drive eyeballs to advertising dollars. And so I don't know that the answer can be software when the questions are very, very fuzzy. What is real? What's reasonable to claim? Who are you? But I think it's super interesting. And to Nikki's point about like your own authenticity, so we were investors in Instagram. Instagram is not about authenticity, right? Every photo on Instagram, which is now most of the photos on Facebook, are filtered. Social media is not about authenticity. So I think the debate will be not just about how we all get to a more authentic place, but like surviving in a world where it's a mix of real and unreal all the time.
So it's a really complex problem with different layers to it. There's the content, the news, for example, that we think of as now suspect. That's not a technology issue. I think we will deal with it over time as we have in kind of the cybersecurity world of knowing when you're dealing with something malicious or not. In the case of news, we can't look at every news item and figure out whether it's real or not because by definition it's new. So how do you can't check Wikipedia or some other source. We have to learn to look at the source and say, do we trust the source? Does the source follow the ethics of journalism? Did they follow the ethics of journalism when they created this? To me, that's and we can audit the source just like we audit finance departments of companies today. We don't know if every number they say is correct, but we know that they have controls in place and they follow certain policies and procedures, and we can do that for sources of journalism. That's only going to solve, one portion of the problem. I think there is room for technology to figure out whether traffic on the internet is actually human or not. Most of the traffic on the web today is actually not human, even though it's pretending to be human. So websites that are supposed to be dealing with human beings are mostly seeing bots talking to them. That's why I invested in and I serve on the board of Distill. And all we do is just distinguish bots from human traffic for websites so they can throw away the bots. And you could use bots for trolling information for elections, but you can also use it for stealing information and launching cyber attacks and all other kinds of nasty things. And in general, if somebody's pretending to be a person, other than a Google crawler, you probably don't want that person in your web store.
Tom, you got anything to tell these guys?
Yeah, I'm going to say one word that I think is going to convince everybody in the audience that this is an important trend. Blockchain.
Very good, very good.
No, but seriously, I think blockchain does have a really important role to play in this. As David mentioned, I think when you're looking at news or you're looking at different kinds of content, a trust score about who the originator or the person who created the content is going to be really important. And blockchain is going to be a key technology. And basically, whenever you produce a piece of content, you sign it with an ID that's decentralized and distributed.
Isn't it? It's more than just authenticating content. I mean, the video, when you can play someone else's voice or someone else's image and voice and make it very convincing, becomes reality then. No, I mean it gets deeper than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but imagine if
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask these questions, Karen, but I'm interested in this one.
Yeah, I mean the way I think about it is if I create a video, I should be required to sign that video, right? Yeah. And so all the videos that I produce then are copyrighted or somehow associated with me. And there will be computer programs and individuals who are then take it upon themselves to determine whether or not this is a computer generated or some form of synthesized video as opposed to something that was real and captured upon my camera. And that will all be assigned to my particular ID, and everything that I do on the internet, visit or whatever, will all accumulate into some sort of a trust score that will then be used to give that content some form of credibility.
I enjoy the anonymous internet.
But the problem with that, by the way, so people have tried that in other venues. They've tried to do things like sign your emails, for example. Yeah. And it doesn't work because unless everybody in the world does it.
Wait, you don't get a rebuttal. This is my rebuttal.
Okay. I think I threw the format off there a bit. I apologize. But maybe it's because I'm in the media. But interesting topic. So, okay, everyone, get your vote out there, and let's see how the crowd goes on this one. Oh! All right. I think we potentially have a first-round winner, but you never know. We've still got another one to go. All right, we got about 10 more seconds here. All right, I think, all right. Everyone voted? No? Okay, keep going.
Let's see if we can break 80. Do I hear 80? Do I hear 80?
There you go. Give me 80, 80, 80, 80.
While you're ahead.
80 twice. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we've got it. 79% agree, 21% disagree. Got to feel good about that one, Tom.
Better to be lucky than good.
There you go.
All right, trend number 5. China accelerates past the US in key technology areas. If you want to have an MRI read today, you might want to fly to China. Deep learning can help radiologists better diagnose cancers, but it'll be years before that technology is widespread in the US. It's already deployed and scaling in China. The strong alignment between the Chinese government and the technology ecosystem, combined with a national focus on key technologies like AI and autonomous vehicles, means that China will become the global leader in these core technologies. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so I was, a bunch of us visited China a few weeks ago, and I went to this one company that helps to power all of the surveillance camera systems across China. And they can basically do facial recognition on 1 billion people, and they can do it in real time, and they can do it across hundreds of thousands of cameras. And there are lots of interesting questions from a societal perspective, both positive and negative there. They will point out that they have found many criminals who maybe committed a crime 25 years ago, and you can still identify today because your facial structure doesn't really change as you age. So there's lots of interesting societal questions. But I think from a pure technology question, it's a very, very impressive piece of technology. And I think it is an example of where I think China is just further ahead than us, and I don't think we fully appreciate it. If you go back 10 years ago, in the early days of Facebook, we launched Facebook, and there ended up being a number of sort of pixel-for-pixel copycats around the world, in Germany, in Russia, and in China. And I think at the time, we sort of resented the fast imitation. I think if you look today and you look at messaging, obviously people talk about WhatsApp, people talk about Messenger. I think both of them pale in comparison to WeChat, which is just a force to be sort of beheld in China. And I think in many ways, the Messenger and WhatsApp team wish that they had something that was as influential and powerful and ubiquitous as WeChat. And so I think I think the political environment here is such that we do a lot of navel gazing, we do a lot of yelling at each other, we have a complex ecosystem in the healthcare space and in the education space that I think is an enemy to innovation. I think, again, for better and for worse, I think the Chinese government and the Chinese sort of tech leaders and the economy in general is marching in lockstep towards innovation. And so I think there's a real risk that in 3 to 5 years' time, we wake up and realize that China is far ahead than the US, and specifically Silicon Valley in these areas. I guess one last comment on that, which is, we talked a little bit about autonomous vehicles earlier. I think there's a very high likelihood that we will see ubiquitous autonomous vehicles in China far before the US, because I think it will be easier in China for the government to just declare that certain roads are autonomous vehicle only, certain sectors are autonomous vehicle only, and you'll just get the sort of the full force of the society towards enabling this technology, whereas I think here you will have a lot more consternation and sort of folks at loggerheads.
All right, panelists, hold your paddles up, whether you agree or disagree with Mike's proposition. In the next 5 years, China is going to blow by the US in technology. Remember, hold them so the back of the room can see. All right. We'll, as our standard format, we'll start with the far end, and David, and you've got a minute to defend your paddle vote.
Okay. I think the fundamental premise that we should be worried about China, that they're going to somehow overtake the United States or or other Western states. I think that's thinking about it like a zero-sum game. If Chinese startups are better able to innovate in any of these areas, it's something that benefits all economies in the world. We all build off each other's inventions. We all buy each other's products, and I think it actually helps us both as consumers and vendors, and in every way that there are other nations out there that are investing in innovation, and it's something that I hope continues, and I think will benefit us.
Sarah?
So I'm going to fight for Mike's point here. I'm also part Chinese, so I spent a lot of time there, and it's amazing. And I think in response to David's point, actually, the market for consumer internet companies, for commerce, even for self-driving cars, it's increasingly global, right? There are companies that are going to be able to manufacture vehicles more cheaply than we are, that are in China. And now if those companies have self-driving teams that test their vehicles faster than we do, because the Chinese government has different attitudes about infrastructure and about safety, then they're going to get there before we do, and they might sell those trucks fully validated in our markets. So I think, technology overall is not a zero-sum game. For any of the companies that we invest in, sometimes it is, right? But it's sort of a point of optimism from a, Wisconsin-born American. One of the hugest advantages that we have in Silicon Valley and in America is that this is a wonderful place to live. So fully almost half of wealthy Chinese people are trying to get the fuck out, right? They want to move to places that feel like the Bay Area. I hope this is not being televised. And so I think the most important thing we can do if we want to keep winning that race is make this a great place to live and also support immigration.
Nicole.
So I really, I guess from a personal note, I really want to be able to disagree because I grew up in England and always wanted to move to the States. I always loved and admired the entrepreneurial spirit here, thought there were so many brilliant minds that were making great change in our world. That's why I did move here. But all the consumer companies that I now look at and invest in, I spend a lot of my time looking at commerce companies, a lot of them that are trying to do commerce through messaging apps. And none of them are anywhere near what WeChat are doing. I spend a lot of time looking at Bird and these different electric scooter companies. And again, it's far surpassed by everything that's happening in China. It's just such an efficient system. All the bikes in China are on every single corner, great unit economics, and all the American companies are aspiring to be them. So I have to agree.
Tom.
I also agree with Mike. I agree for two reasons. I think the first thing, one of the things that really enabled the internet and the software industry to explode in the early 2000s in the US was this notion of a safe harbor, which was basically a set of non-regulations that allowed internet companies to experiment and explore. And today, a lot of the areas where startups are expanding and exploring in the US are the ones that are stifled by regulation or have structural challenges that the Chinese simply won't face. The second thing is, the second reason I believe this is true is a lot of the advances that we're going to see are machine learning based. And the Chinese basically just have greater access to scale and a greater ability to generate far greater data sets than we do, which means that their algorithms will converge successfully faster. And so ultimately they will win.
Mike.
Yeah, to clarify, this is not a criticism of China. This is wide-eyed optimism about China. This is firmly a criticism of the US. And I think I was born in America. I am deeply patriotic. I'm the son of immigrants, and we moved here for a better life. And so I love the US with all my heart. But I think my mother is English. If I had the choice between living in the US or living in Europe, I would rather live in the US because I feel like we are a more forward-leaning society. I fear that China becomes a more forward-leaning society and we descend into bickering and complacency. So.
Okay, it's time to vote.
On that note.
I'll parenthetically add that I recently interviewed Jim Breyer, whose new fund, Briar Capital, as he said, is in year 3 of a 10-year AI experiment. So it's all AI all the time. And I asked him the question, and he said, it all comes down to the universities. And right now, the U.S. he believes is slightly ahead in the field of AI, but he sees the two running away from everybody else.
Curious where I'm supposed to also argue to get that extra 6 or 7 points.
Mike, while we have about 20 seconds left,
Yeah.
would you say that the vote as it's lining up now is more an expression of optimism about China or pessimism about the United States?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think I would feel differently if we had a more progressive and less retrograde immigration policy. I think the worry I have is that we will reject the people that come to the U.S. and cause our economy to be the best in the world.
All right, voting is done, 72 to 28. You carried the day substantially.
Very good. So that concludes round 1, right? Now we go into second trend. So round 2, David, we'll begin with you again on trend number 6. High-density AI promises conversational bots smart enough to disrupt mobile commerce. High-density AI will break up NLP into narrow domains that neural networks can master, enabling a generation of conversational bots who can reliably satisfy consumer needs without human intervention. With intuitiveness and immediacy, these bots will displace mobile apps as a dominant UI for computing, which will disrupt the entire consumer internet economy. David?
Right. So we've seen one major disruption already happen when mobile apps came along and disrupted desktop computing. And that happened because mobile apps are so much more immediate and intimate and easy. And when that happened, we went from having just a handful of applications that we used on computers to having 100 apps. They're not applications, they're apps that we use in what we think of as more snack size consumption. That is now going to take the next step as we now get to a point where computing can be much, much more intuitive and much more immediate through voice. We've been talking about how voice is going to be a very powerful, much more intuitive, natural interface, but we also all have had the frustration of trying to talk to Siri or Alexa, and it's kind of fun. You could say, tell me a joke or tell me the weather or whatever it is. And it gets to a certain point at which you realize this assistant just isn't really going to be able to solve the problems that I have. And that's because they're all designed for question and answer. I ask you a question, you give me an answer. That's not the way we talk to people. We have conversations. You want to exchange information, I say something, you talk to me back, we exchange some information. We don't think of these digital assistants as being able to do that, but that's just simply because they haven't learned to do that yet. There's now this high-density AI approach which is making that possible. High-density AI says take a neural network and focus it on a very narrow domain, and then you can learn how to do that domain really, really well. And then it's the job of Siri or Google or Cortana or Alexa not to answer the question, but to classify the question and say, I know an intelligence that can answer exactly what you're looking for. So now you can do little things that that don't make sense to pull an app out to do, because that's going to be too unwieldy. And there'll be all these little things during the day that we can talk to these intelligences about, and they'll be able to help us with. Like, if you want to do something like food journaling, that's something that you're not going to use an app for because it's too unwieldy. Many of us want to journal food consumption. Well, if you could just say, hey, Amy, that's my food journaling AI, I just had a burger. And Amy says, oh, did you have it with a bun? Were there pickles on it? Yes, I did. What did you have to drink? I had a Diet Coke. Anything else? No, that's it. Conversation done. Can't do that with an app. When that happens, app interfaces will be as obsolete as applications, and think about things like Uber or other apps that you pull your phone out to do, very, very soon we're going to think of that as obsolete when you can simply say, hey, Bruce, I want to get to San Francisco, how shall I get there? That Uber interface is going to look old and clunky. The entire mobile economy is going to be replaced yet again, not by 100 apps, but by 1,000 different intelligences who help in your life with every little interaction that you need.
All right, panelists, hold those paddles high and proud and let David know how you feel. You got a blackout there, I've all read. Oh, no. Why don't we start in the middle? We'll disrupt this flow here. Nicole, what's the issue with his idea?
So I feel like we've been talking about bots for a long time. I definitely have spent some time hoping that this trend has something more to it. I use Epitome every morning, or I tell them I use it every morning, for conversations around what to wear that day, and you have a conversation with the bot. There's others like Snaps that have done okay, but just haven't really had transformational change. So my thoughts are that we've been hoping for some time, a long time actually, that bots would get there, and they just haven't. And my other thoughts are that it's not really AI. We still live in a world where it's artificial intelligence. And it's just, quite frankly, a human who's there. And I know that we're certainly going in that direction, but it's definitely not here. And I don't think it's going to be here in the time that we're hoping it will be.
Sarah, you looked eager to say something there.
Yeah, I think NLP is super interesting. I've invested in it. We're making progress. But I think there's two ways this can go, right? Either there's a limited set of commands that you can communicate, in which case it's not AI necessarily, it's like a slightly smarter command line, right? You know, I use the command line, I'm a nerd, I like it, it's fast and useful in some ways, but it's not transformational, it's not the UI for everybody. Or you actually figure out how to interact in the ways I want to interact as a human, and you support sort of the fullness of all the weird ways we as humans have conversations with one another. And not to get too technical, but that gets into a realm of how do deep learning and modern machine learning approaches work with traditional knowledge representation and our understanding of the model of the world. And I think that problem is not a 3-year problem.
Tom?
Yeah, I think browsing is a really important way that people shop. And in fact, for lots of people, it's a pastime. It's a hobby. It's a way to spend time. And I think the premise of the theme was that bots would replace mobile commerce. And just because bots will never help you browse, I think they can't revolutionize mobile commerce.
Yeah, I feel like I've lived in the future where you talk to someone to get a car to pick you up, and it's called taxis, and I hated it. So I prefer the I prefer the Uber approach where you push a button and a car shows up. I think the conversational stuff works for very complicated queries, but that is also the hardest thing to get working. And so I agree with Tomasz that for most things, I would much rather have an interface that is optimized for the task as opposed to an open-ended interface that makes easy things harder with the promise of maybe making some harder things easier.
A rebuttal to
Sure.
any of these naysayers?
Yeah, well, I have time, I think, to the two most important, I think. The first one is that, gee, I've tried these things and they don't really work that great, and I've been kind of disappointed. So absolutely, what's happened is that people are writing bots to replace entire applications or trying to replace apps. And they're trying to do too much with these things, and a single neural network is never going to be able to cover all of the situations that an app can cover through lots of menus and features and all of that. And that's the mistake that we've had. It works for enterprises where you can start a conversation and then hand it off to a human being when you get stuck. We've all seen that happening, and that's successful. How do you get it to actually work where it works for a person? And the only way to do it is to break up the problem, to break it up into narrow domains, and then you can have neural networks that really understand everything about this domain. That's the new approach that I think is going to restructure the entire world of computing, when And then you will have much, much more satisfying interactions than you've had to date. That's the key change that I think is going to enable this. And then your point about you'd rather push a button, well, you are, an engineer and somebody who likes to push buttons. In the human experience, language is what we have evolved to go to as the default form of communication. It doesn't have to be voice, it can be texting, but either way, language is natural and intuitive to everybody. And to your point about opening up the world to computing, it's not just the illiterate, it's everybody who doesn't know how to use a computer who will find voice and natural language much, much easier for them to enter into what computers can do for them.
Very good. Folks, get your vote in. Got 1 minute.
This is worse than extraterrestrial commerce.
I thought anything with AI would score very high, but evidently not.
I pride myself on contrarian investment themes.
Evidently, that's good. Thus your film you created, right? All right, folks, we're down to
by the way, that wasn't me in the film. That was deep pornography.
Well, there you go. But I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell what was authentic and what was not. All right, we've got it. 40-60. I think that was the same as last time. No? I'm not sure, but that was bold. Thank you. Rich, on to the next.
No guts, no glory, David. So
there you go. I like that.
Give you credit for that. Swinging big. Trend number 7, the all-seeing eye. Cheap and smart algorithms with computer vision algorithms. Cheap and smart cameras with computer vision algorithms are blanketing the world. New smart camera apps, from your face unlocking your phone to Amazon Go stores, will delight consumers. But this tracking of our every move will also make or remake expectations and regulation around surveillance. Sarah?
If you live in an American city, you're caught on a security camera about 70 times a day. But mostly these cameras have been dumb, eyes without brains, blindly saving images and video to some server in some closet, never to be seen again. Now cameras are cheaper and smarter, adding algorithms to understand the content that they're capturing. Ubiquitous smart cameras will impact us in non-obvious ways as consumers, as business owners, and as the subjects of surveillance. First, new consumer experiences. Cameras will power seamless convenience for identity and purchasing. You're already beginning to experience this with touch and face ID on your phone, walking out of a store without checking out, as with Amazon Go. Cams can watch your front door. They'll notify you when your kids get home. They'll capture memories while you're out, automatically saving clips of the milestones that you missed. Second, images and videos will be a rich data source for businesses to mine for competitive advantage. With smart cameras, businesses will be able to measure things that were previously unmeasurable. Think about the quality of every good on a manufacturing line, or the emotions and actions of every employee or customer. We're going to see extreme personalization. Ads that ask you, are you sure you don't want to buy that t-shirt that you window shopped at the mall yesterday? But this ubiquitous surveillance will change our behavior. There's a saying, you are who you are when no one's watching. But I think we're all going to be watched. And I know I'm going to change as a driver if all the cars around me are going to be rating my politeness and safety all the time. Mike actually gave an example earlier of, in China, there are pervasive networks of security cameras, and combined with a government facial identification database, anything you do can factor into your social citizenship score. And that score is used to determine whether or not you have access to a loan and at what interest rate. Are you comfortable with that future? My prediction is that ubiquitous smart cameras will enable great new consumer experiences, and they'll drive competitive advantage for businesses. But they'll also change our behavior in fundamental and non-obvious ways. As an analogy, think of all of your behavior online today. What the all-seeing eye, or cameras everywhere, will do is capture that data even richer for your real life in the offline world. Are we ready for that?
All right, time for the panelists to hold up their paddles. Hold them so the back of the room can see. Okay. We'll start with you, Mike, and explain your vote.
Yeah, I love this space. I think this is going to happen. I think the way most people physically get into their office today is they take some RFID badge out of their pocket and they swipe it against some HID reader on the wall. I think there are companies in China where you just walk in and it's all facial recognition and it just figures out who are employees and who are not. And I am excited by the future where you can basically just walk up to your building and it opens up if it recognizes you and it doesn't if it doesn't. And so I think there's just going to be a Cambrian explosion in terms of the number of people building interesting applications on top of computer vision and cheap cameras. So it's an exciting space.
Tom.
I really hope this doesn't happen. And I say that because I think there's...
But it will.
I know. Well, maybe, but I really don't want it to happen. I think it's exactly what you said, which is, are you ready for it? No, I'm not. I'm not ready for it because I think there is a lot of truth to the fact that you are not, you're going to be a different person if you're watched all the time. And I think that that's going to make Americans who, also as an immigrant, I perceive as being very strong. I mean, just look at the attachment to the Second Amendment in this country and its notion of freedom, right? If you're tracked all the time and everybody knows exactly what you're doing all the time and you're being rated, I just think there's going to be a rebellion against it. There's going to be people who are just not going to like that feeling of constantly being surveilled. And so as a consequence, there'll be regulation that stifles this innovation.
Nicole, the future's already arrived and it's called London, isn't it?
So I tend to think of everything from a consumer perspective. And so I love what Sarah's talking about because I already feel like my day-to-day is enhanced and just made, quite frankly, simpler and quicker because of facial recognition. So whether it's downloading a new app or whether it's checking into my Venmo or my Chase account, it's great that it can just already do that with regards to facial recognition. But haven't any of you watched the Black Mirror episode? Yeah. Oh my God, relating to this, it's a very dark episode. I recommend you all watch it this evening if you want nightmares. And it's exactly talking about this. Like everybody has a score, we will be watched at all times and everyone will have this score. Maybe people give one another a score or maybe it's the cameras watching you. But that terrifies me and I hope we don't go down that route. But I do like what you're talking about, and I agree with the consumer adoption.
David.
So certainly there are more cameras every year, but this is something that has been going on. I think that we are developing an understanding of how we separate private, semi-private, and public video that we collect. I think we're getting smarter about realizing that cameras in our homes have to be, accessible only behind secure accounts. Amazon's Ring is figuring this out now because they had this flaw that exposed some video from their Ring doorbells. There is private video in your homes. There's semi-private video in, say, your workplace, which your company has to then keep very, they can have it, but it has to be private. And there's public video. And you have to assume if you're in a public place, people are watching you. That's always been the case. So I think, if anything, we're just getting smarter about segmenting those different experiences and figuring out, where we're being watched, when, and it's going to get better, not worse, as we develop those policies and technologies.
All right, Sarah, you have a minute to close the deal with the audience.
Sure. So it's not my fault what the future holds, so if it's scary, I apologize. But in seriousness, I think there could be a backlash. I think there are things that people care about in terms of privacy and a little bit increasingly slow. But you know, I do a little bit of security investing, and I care about consumer privacy a lot more than I think your average person or even tech person. And all the data thus far would show that every time consumers choose functionality and convenience over security. And so if it's easier to walk in the door, I'm going to do that. And if it's easier to do Touch ID, I'm not going to worry about my thumbprint. And so I think that there are going to be amazing experiences that are driven by this technology that will much of the time win over our desire for security and privacy. The final thing I'd say is just to draw an analogy to the online world. Like, the number of people that actually browse in incognito all the time and try not to be tracked or turn off, mobile ad identification on their smartphone is vanishingly small. So I'd say, like, a lot of our lives, we live online today, and a lot of that data is pretty sensitive, and we're kind of just like, you know what? I would love to shop with things that make sense for me, and I think that may happen in the real world, too.
All right, audience. We have about a minute to vote, and we'll see how it comes out. You're off to a strong start.
Oh, guys, 70 is a good number.
Remember, we're watching you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Cameras are everywhere.
All right, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're producing all these great round numbers. 70 to 30, you carried the day overwhelmingly.
All right, we move on to trend number 8. People will no longer distinguish between online and offline worlds. We've seen e-commerce and retail come together into omni-channel and experiential retail. We'll see the same for social, dating, media, fitness, and everything else. Nicole?
So as online and offline come together, I'd love to first talk about a huge industry where we're already starting to see this. So you see e-commerce and you see brick and mortar retail come together in terms of a better shopping experience, and that's omni-channel. You see them come together in terms of a better marketing experience, and that's experiential retail. This is just a very new, early type of marketing. If anyone's been to the Museum of Ice Cream in San Francisco, see people pay over $35 just so they can go in and take photos in a brick and mortar location so that they can put it on Instagram and share it with all their friends through a digital means. It's just merging. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of that.
Does that really go on in San Francisco?
That does, yeah.
I didn't know
you
that.
You can go there yourself, actually. So if you think about other marketing channels, we've already seen it go from newspapers to Google to Facebook to influencers. All of those different marketing channels are now very fully priced. So we've got to think about what is the next marketing channel. I believe it's experiential retail, which again is that merging of online and offline. So let's think about others that this will also happen to. I believe we're already starting to see it in social and dating, media and fitness. I actually just had a conversation with Sarah's husband before this, Pat, and we were talking about Peloton. And that's a great example of, like, do we want to go and do an in-person class at SoulCycle, or do we want to have a great digital experience and use Peloton? The same for meditation. Do we want to use the Calm app? Do we want to do it in a physical location? So I think we're going to start to see all of our different industries merge so that we're not necessarily thinking, is this online, is this offline? We're going to see the two combined.
Panelists, you want to put your paddles high? Slow to vote here. This is a tricky one.
Back of the room high.
Yeah, back of the room high. There you go. Tom, why don't you start there? You seem torn.
Did you pick me because I'm torn and I haven't put my argument together?
Oh.
So
I thought you had a dual argument, possibly.
No, I do believe that offline data is going to be an important component in targeting ads and the experience that happens online and vice versa. I think the part that I disagree with is the fact that people won't be able to distinguish between the two. That's the part that, because I just imagine this world where you're kind of like plugged into the matrix and you're like dating somebody and you're dressed up as like some purple creature. And you know what I mean? And like you meet the woman that you're talking to and
now,
she can't distinguish you.
How do you date? We should come back to that later.
And she can't distinguish you, and so I don't want to see that dystopian future happen, and so that's why I'm voting no.
David, you want to respond?
I just think this has already happened. I don't think people today, I don't think it's a question about whether people can distinguish. I just don't think people do. Today, there's no such thing as any real world service that's not going to try to also have an ongoing presence in your life through an app or collect information about you offline. The idea that my only interaction is going to be when you're actually standing in my store, that's just a very non-competitive way to operate today. So the examples you have about social and dating and being, I think it's already happened. We're already living in that world today.
Mike?
Yeah, I think I had a similar struggle to Tomasz, where I think there will be increasing integration between online and offline experiences, but I think I struggled with the word distinguish as well. And I think when you know, on the experiential retail side, I think that is, I think it's interesting. I think it's like an interesting in-person marketing channel. I'm not sure that it's kind of quite the future of commerce. And so I think I'm not sure how to extrapolate the trend beyond agreeing that there will be increasing integration between online experiences and offline experiences. So I was kind of a half red, half green, realizing that was not allowed.
And Sarah?
I don't have anything interesting to add, what Vernal said.
Well, how are you going to respond to that, Nicole? Nothing interesting to add. You can fight it all you want, but...
Did you agree or disagree?
I vaguely agreed. Okay, I will actually state my opinion. I think that this is happening in that, we talk about, when we serve businesses as venture capitalists and try to solve their problems, every business is trying to be a digital business, right? Like every Fortune 500 company has been talking about digital transformation for years. And so I don't think it's non-obvious that offline and online are closer together. I think there are interesting things in how they will integrate and people will create great experiences with some flavors of the other. But I don't have a strong opinion on how this becomes this massive future of commerce trend.
So I'm going to address David's point, which is I'm so glad that you say it's already happening in retail, because that's exactly my point. It's already happening in retail. But which other industries is it now going to happen to? Government right now, mainly offline. That is, I think, going to go through this same change. Cameras, to Sarah's point. Real estate. There are so many other big sectors where we're going to start to think about the difference between online, offline. Open Door is a great example in real estate. It's only just started. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years in retail is going to happen to, I believe, every other industry over the next few years.
Let's take it to a vote. Oh, that was quick.
Have you guys made any cool investments in space? Mine.
Yeah, you're live.
Okay, I don't think they can hear you.
I was going to ask if David had made any cool investments in space. Ask you after. Sorry, team.
All right, we're down to 10, 9, 8, 7. Looks like we're locked in there. 20 to 80, another roundy. All right, votes are all in. That's it, Rich?
Yeah, that's a big win for what was once called meat space. You know, you have online and then you have the physical world meat space. Nobody uses that anymore. I'm dating myself. Trend number 9, the decentralization of data.
I use that term.
Today, all
You're
of
not
our
dating
data is
yourself.
centralized in clouds controlled by a handful of data oligarchs. In the future, users will exert more control over their personal data and use a technology like blockchain to do it. In other words, this is kind of a call for the peak big tech, is what I'm hearing. Tom, over to you.
There's one person in my life that knows literally everything about me, and it's not my wife. It's Google. Google knows where I am right now. It knows what I watch. It's seen every single one of my photos. It's seen my children grow up. It knows where I travel. It knows who I call. It knows who I text message. It knows every single page I've ever visited on the internet. It knows every app I ever fire up. It knows when I wake up and how many times I hit the snooze button. There are a few of these data oligopolies that exist, and they're benefiting from huge economies of scale and network effects. And they're creating the modern version of the oil barons or the railroad barons. And like oil and telecom before them, I believe they will be regulated. How did we get here? We got here because of Marc Andreessen. Marc Andreessen created the cookie. And so it used to be that when you were visiting a browser, the browser knew nothing about you. And so each time you visited a website or you went from one web page to the next, the previous web page didn't know anything about you. So Marc Andreessen got a great idea to put a little bit of data in the data browser and called it a cookie. And then cookies totally took off. And then what ended up happening is we developed more and more sophisticated applications, and instead of storing data within that cookie, we started storing them in databases. And the companies that won were the ones with the largest amounts of data that used to be in those cookies, and those are the companies like Facebook and Google today. And the consequence of all this is now you have companies that have created a $100 or a $200 billion industry that are all mining our information, using everything they know about us in order to make money. And that's a perfectly viable way of going around building a business. But in the future, and soon, I believe that there's going to be a strong anti-tech wave, that the safe harbor laws that allow these companies to grow in early this millennium will change, and that regulation will happen. And in addition to that, customer sentiment will change in such a way that we will all ask to be remunerated in some fashion above and beyond where we are today for the use of that data.
Okay, provocative statement. Hold your paddles high so the back of the room can see them.
Be contrarian. I like it.
Yeah. See, that's what you get for being provocative and contrarian. But that was great. Let's start. We'll start with you, David, and
Okay.
explain your vote.
Well, first, the European data privacy standard does exactly what you're talking about and forces companies like Google and Facebook to allow people to exert more control. So I agree that that is going to happen. And, but there are a few things about this that I disagree with. One is that it will be controlled by a handful of data oligarchs. Data are not like oil or railroads. The barrier to entry is very, very low. It's very, very easy for lots of people to collect data in all kinds of ways, which is, I mean, you touched on it, and so I don't think it's going to be an oligopoly, and I think blockchain is all about exerting non-repudiation to prove that somebody did something or didn't do something. It doesn't actually give anybody control, or it's not encryption. It doesn't hide things from the public. In fact, blockchain is very, very public. So I don't think blockchain will help in this regard. And then finally, I'm still holding out the position that the word data is plural and therefore should be conjugated as all of our data are centralized. I know it's fighting, swimming upstream here.
You're
but
totally right.
That's I'm sticking to that.
That's a whole nother debate.
Sarah.
I can't picture the business model where users get something from their data. I think, like, you know, maybe there are people who are going to opt into less advertising and more subscription, which is kind of tangential. But I guess, like, it's very obvious to me that Google and Facebook and Instagram and whoever else, they know a lot about me, and, like, I'm cool with that because I like Instagram and I like getting my search results, and, like, when I use my phone, like, all the things pop up in my notifications that are perfectly personalized to me, and I'm not giving that up. I can't picture a world, I tend to bow to the consumer, and I just can't picture a world where people will choose to give up important functionality to constrain their data from somebody who, you know, has been using it in a way where like, these mobile applications drive our lives, right? And I agree with David. I just don't understand how blockchain plays in here.
Nicole.
I agreed with the points around Google. Again, I had an issue with the word blockchain. My thoughts were that, yes, it's public. Also, it's just not something that the 99% are adopting anytime soon. It's just very early. And so I don't think that we should be, I definitely had an issue with the blockchain side of things. I've also looked at a couple of companies that did encourage people to not necessarily sell their data, but say, hey, if you give us your data for X, Y, and Z, then we'll give you coupons, money off these retail products. And again, they just didn't really take off. So I don't think that there's willingness from the consumer to give their data for, you know, for anything really.
Mike.
I agree with all these points. I also agree that blockchain is not the right solution here. I also agree that the idea of, like, remunerating users for their time in this kind of micropayment way, I'm very, very skeptical of. I guess the one other point that I would add is I'm just, like, a pretty big believer that, well, one, I'm a pretty big believer in capitalism, and two, I'm a pretty big believer in, like, centralization being better for innovation than decentralization. I think decentralization is good for basically not robustness, but kind of the opposite of innovation, basically stagnation. And so, you know, email hasn't changed in 30 years in any material way, and, you know, no one was ever able to really add sort of to make email secure. There are obviously lots of attempts over time, but the problem is email is so decentralized that there are dozens of different clients, there are dozens of different servers. There are some benefits to that, but I think the biggest cost is innovation. And I just believe that centralized companies that are trying to build great products for consumers will innovate way faster than decentralized organizations. So I think decentralization should be left to systems that need to be designed either for non-repudiation or just reliability in the face of, like, very malicious actors or nuclear attack as, you know, the internet was initially designed.
Well, Tomasz, you got an uphill battle here. You got a minute to persuade the audience.
All right, here I go. So I think those are all really good arguments. I think the first sign for me that people really care about how their data is being stored and the fact that this is a mass market problem is the prevalence of ad blockers. So this is actually a pretty important and near existential threat for companies like Google, where 25 to 35% of people who use the internet actually actively block ads. And one of the primary reasons they actively block ads is because they don't want information about them being captured and used to target them. And so I use that as basically a proxy for people becoming sophisticated enough to understand the value of their own data, people taking active steps in order to prevent the data oligopolies from capturing this data and using it without their consent.
Is that right? I block ads because my pages load faster. Yeah.
I don't think people realize if you show them an ad that means this website's going to get information about them.
I disagree. I think it's a really important part. I mean, if you look at, you know, Google runs this thing called ad choices. You can hit a box and it shows you everything that the ad knows about you. And I think that's a really important and strong sentiment that's in the population, and I believe at some point that will be reflected in regulation. As a consequence, some of these data oligopolies will be broken down, and people in some form, and I don't pretend to know how they're going to do it. It could be a technology like the blockchain. It could be another technology. But I do think that internet users are becoming more sophisticated, understand exactly what is being captured, or to some extent what is being captured, and are going to fight it.
All right, let's let the audience speak by way of their vote.
I hope you're right.
It's closer
It'll
than I
make the
thought.
VC job easier.
What's that?
Based on what the panel thought.
It'll make the VC job a little easier.
Yeah. If I say it enough times, it will be true.
Should write another book about it, then it'll
yeah, exactly.
be true in people's minds.
That's a good point.
Your votes will be collected and added to your profiles.
Yeah. All right, the vote is hardened up for 3, 2, 1, and we'll freeze it there. 57-43. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, here we go to trend 10 to take us home. Robotics go mainstream because of the AV gold rush. Thousands of engineers and billions of dollars are being poured into the race for an autonomous passenger vehicle. The investment will, A, massively drive down the price of key sensors and accentuators, B, 100x the pool of engineers trained in perception and planning, and C, inspire tons of entrepreneurs in adjacent industries, trucking, construction, warehouse management, etc. We will see a surge in autonomous robots replacing dangerous or laborious jobs across industries. Mike, take us to the finish line.
Yeah, so obviously people here have probably heard about people working on self-driving cars. There are billions of dollars being poured into this. I think one interesting proxy here is just LiDAR. Today, there's basically one company in the market that manufactures LiDAR called Velodyne, and to buy a unit is very expensive. There are probably 50 companies around the world that are working on dramatically cheaper LiDAR. I think today, to outfit a car with the sensors needed for self-driving probably costs around $50,000. It seems clear to me that within 3 to 5 years, the sensors will probably cost a few $100s, maybe $1,000 on the car. So there's a tremendous amount of money being poured into this space. It's driving the cost of a lot of these things down dramatically. As far as I can tell, self-driving engineers get paid a lot of money. I think the rumors and the things that you read in the press say that the best folks get paid millions of dollars a year. I think that will inspire a lot of very good engineers in adjacent spaces to, hey, I should probably go figure out this self-driving thing. I think it will inspire people at Stanford, at MIT, at CMU, at great colleges, hey, maybe I should go work on this thing. And so I think the number of engineers that understand and work in this space is going to increase dramatically. And then lastly, I think there's also 50 companies, 50 startups, probably more, that are working on the perception and planning layers of autonomous vehicles. We probably don't need, as a world, 50 different stacks for for self-driving cars. That would probably be a negative thing. We probably need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And so I think a lot of these companies will pivot into adjacent spaces. I think a lot of the engineers that join these companies will spin out and do new things. And I think there are a lot of interesting areas for them to tackle. Trucking is certainly one, as Sarah mentioned earlier. I think warehouse management is super interesting. Amazon, I think part of the reason Amazon is so far ahead of many of the other e-commerce providers is the Kiva acquisition it did about a decade ago and its sophistication in the warehouse side. And then I think there's just lots of unsexy jobs in industry that are dangerous, whether they're at power plants or whether they're in mines or the like, that I think robots can do in a much safer and more cost-effective manner. And then lastly, if you just take agriculture, there are certain types of crops today, like corn, which are effectively autonomously harvested, giant John Deere machines with GPS and a guy playing Candy Crush while the thing moves. But then there's lots of other industries where it's very hard to actually harvest the fruit. It's very hard to have a robot pick a strawberry or pick an apple or the like. And so I think there will be lots of folks that are developing robots for agriculture, which will dramatically decrease the cost of producing a lot of these things, and then also just change the labor force there.
Very good. Panelists, you know the drill by now. Hold them high.
What does AV stand for?
Sorry, autonomous vehicles.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, hold them up to the back of the room. Sorry, it's the last one. Your arm's getting tired. 3 greens and 1 red. Why don't we start with Sarah there on the red?
Yeah, it's a weak red. I think it's a really interesting second-order effect of like people investing in autonomy. What I would argue are 2 things. One, the relative ecosystem size is just not that big, right? Like, so for example, like, I don't know, Cisco or Facebook, like they're one company and they're like 30,000 engineers. So that's a lot of people that are working on one set of problems in networking or systems and consumer interfaces and all that. I think the skill set that you need to create economically relevant robotics companies is like broad and deep. So building companies in robotics is really hard. And that's one of the things that we've experienced having made some less effective investments over the years in hardware at Greylock. It's expensive. I think it's going to get cheaper. But the sort of talent pool that's available and the ease of building these companies is not like dramatically decreased, I think. And then the other thing that I would add is, this may be an unpopular argument, but I would say there's this like really attractive idea of like robots are going to replace all the jobs, at least in Silicon Valley. And the reality of when you compare the cost of a warehouse worker, for example, and the flexibility of what any normal, competent human being is able to do, move this thing of this many different shapes into this other box, handle edge cases, walk around, like that's a pretty rich set of things to ask a robot to do. So I just think that the bar is quite high in terms of actually achieving functionality that's economically relevant.
David?
Well, I voted green because I think it's a good observation that there will be this second order effect. It's not like robotics are new. I'm waiting for a robot to drive my car. Robots already built my car, and so that's already the robots are maybe ahead of the autonomous vehicles in many respects. But I do think that you're right that there is an enormous amount of activity in universities, among startups, all right now chasing the AV market, and there will be a lot of good things coming out of it. A parallel market there is drones. There's a lot of activity also going on in the drone market, which is somehow overlapping with the AV market in some respects. And I think those 2 markets together are motivating a really rich generation of technology and engineers.
Nicole?
So I guess I was green. So I do agree with you with regards to the money being put to work here, the smart minds being put towards this. I think Sarah raised some good points on the other side of things. I do also think the regulation is going to take some time to get there. I think consumer demand is going to take some time to get there. We forget that we all are just so ready to adopt the newest, coolest technology and have so much trust and faith. But there's so many people in the country that are not going to have the trust in a car that it drives you around without you holding the steering wheel. So I think it will take longer. I don't think that's going to happen right now in terms of explosive growth. I think it'll take a little bit longer. But Green, I think you raise a good argument.
Yeah, I agree with both of your points. I think Sarah's argument is compelling. I think we met this one company, it's this MIT professor, and he was building an exoskeleton. And the way an exoskeleton, which is just like a shell around a human being, and he decided to build an exoskeleton because he needed enough training data to replace a pick, pack, and ship worker. And a pick, pack, and ship worker is just somebody who puts stuff in boxes. And the way he was going to get this data is he put this shell, this exoskeleton around this human, and then the human would step into it every day, do their work, knowing that they were kind of training their robotic replacement. And it was just like soul-crushing. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I think that's an important force and a consideration to talk about, but I think what you're talking about is inevitable.
So I think I feel like Sarah and I agreed on every other trend, so I'm sad that she disagreed on this one. But
I think it's really cool. I like exoskeletons.
I will. So a couple of just rebuttals to that. One, I think 7 years ago, machine learning was a relatively niche skill. There were a handful of academic centers sort of around the world that specialized in it, and there were a handful of very good people at Google and Facebook that did it. But I think the explosion over the past 7 years has caused basically every CS student who graduates to have some decent competency with it. And so I think there is a good chance that a similar thing, I agree with your observation about the number of roboticists today, but I think there's a good chance that robotics looks like machine learning 7 years ago. Two, I also agree with your point about the cost and the person. I think a couple of rebuttals. One is, people generally don't like to work the graveyard shift, and I think one of the benefits of robots is they can basically work 24/7. So you can have, and robots generally don't need to see, they don't need light, and so I think you could have robots roving the fields basically 24/7 to just dramatically decrease the number of days it takes to harvest something. And so I think there will be all these other benefits that come from robots. And then lastly, robots I think tend to be more of an upfront CapEx, a capital expenditure, and like a lower OpEx. And so for small use cases, it may still be efficient to pay humans, but I think for things that happen at very high scale, it makes sense to pay the upfront CapEx and get the lower OpEx. So.
Okay, folks, your last opportunity to vote. Get them up there.
And I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. So.
There is the love and hate thing with robots, isn't there?
I feel like I have a very dystopian view of the future. I'm actually very optimistic, but yeah, robots.
All right, we're going to 5 more seconds. Get your vote in. 4, 3, 2, 1. 72 to 28. Pretty good. Scary. I heard in the audience.
Well, legendary Sequoia founder Don Valentine would have been proud of that vote, so congratulations on that. Now, as poll everywhere prepares to reveal our trend winner, let's take a look at our wizard wand that someone will win. The wizard wand is up there. And I've been told on good authority that this commissioned item was created by the Acme Wand Supply, whose slogan is, "When it's just you and the Prince of Darkness, only an Acme will do." The handle is fashioned of blue and white celluloid. The shaft is made of ebony. The accents are sterling silver. What else could they be? Its end cap is abalone and equipped with a quartz crystal to help with future gazing, and is finished with a moonstone tip and engraving that reads, 2018 Churchill Club Trend Wizard. And it says here, parentheses, audience laughs. You're supposed to laugh at this. We're basically just killing time while we accumulate the results here. So that was pretty lame, but I didn't write it. Chris. You see, it was good writing. Chris wrote good comedy here. So, Mike, this is your first time doing this. How did you enjoy the experience?
Well, it's a fascinating conversation, right? You don't get dinner conversation like this too many places. So it was scary at times. I agree with some of the your personal life is gone. And I've never heard the term deep porn, so I've learned something new tonight. So At any rate, I found it really an enlightening first round, so I hope to come back again in the future.
I think if your topic wins, I hope you change the title to Deep Porn. So in 5 years, when they're going through the 2018 ones, people are very confused.
I'd be so embarrassed.
Yeah, I kept thinking on the cameras. I don't want those cameras on me, but I want them on the other bastards, especially those
that's the
people
problem.
driving 90 miles an hour and weaving in and out of lanes on 280. You know, they should be gone. But so yeah, photograph the bad guys.
Now we're waiting for the tabulation. I gather.
We're waiting for the tabulation.
It's up.
Okay,
there
here we
goes.
go.
So, Rich, having never done this, am I supposed to announce the hunt for authenticity as the overall winner, or?
I think cat's out of the bag now.
Is that, well, I don't know, is that or is it a compilation
We're tabulating the winner, right?
Yeah, sorry, so I did jump the gun there.
Yeah. Okay, but the individual winner among the panelists.
This is like that, was it the Academy Awards?
Yeah,
where they went the wrong way. We want to make sure we get this right.
Oh, so it'll show that.
What are they trying to tabulate?
I don't know. I think it's Vernal, right?
Okay.
If they add the two.
Just trying to.
Okay.
It's not.
Well, let's give Tom a big hand.
Tom, it's wonderful. I don't have it. And I was supposed to have this beautiful wand underneath the. Here it is, right here.
There's the wand.
You have no idea how deeply moving this is to provide you with this wand. It really is a wizard's wand here. So congrats, Tom.
Thank you very much. Thank you for my fellow panelists. Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, and just to wrap up here, you speakers have been incredibly good sports. We want to thank all of you very much. We invite you to keep your paddles and just let your imaginations run wild on how you use your paddles. Carry them with you always, and you can discreetly agree or disagree in any meeting. You've been a terrific audience as well. We hope you've learned something and been inspired. Drop off your business card to the Churchill team member if you'd like to receive a copy of the trends. Thank you and good night.
Okay.
And I think they just want to take photos.
Sure.
Okay, good. Hey, thanks, guys. That's our duty there.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah? Congrats, Dom.
Thank you so much.
Right here, 1, 2, 3.